Our next presentation has the title, Your Brain on Video Games, the Cognitive Benefits of Playing Video Games. Please welcome Luca Previtire.
Do your kids play too many video games? If you're like most parents, you're worried that your children play too many hours of video games and neglect other good things, like playing outside or reading a book, doing the things that make them healthy instead of sitting around. Maybe you'd much rather have them become more invested in their education here at Trinity. Well, in the US alone, 65% of the population plays video games, totaling 212 million players, with a global audience of 3 billion. Gaming is pretty integral in our culture, but some parents are worried about it. At 7.6 hours per week, the average gamer plays over just 1 hour every day on average. That's an hour that could be spent learning, or reading, or doing anything else, really. Some worry that maybe we let it become a bit too integral for that reason. Concerns about video games were factors for the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, in 1994 by Doug Lowenstein, following the 1993 congressional hearings about the content being put in video games at the time, which was completely unregulated up until that point. The Columbine High School shooting on April 20th, 1999 was a time when the concerns about video games began to especially rise once more. The shooter's connection to violent video games fueled debates about the possible influence it may have had on their behavior, and as such, parents like you grew much more worried and careful around video games. As a parent, your concerns are heard and certainly valid. But I argue that parents should allow their children to play video games, not because they are entertaining, but because they have psychological benefits for developing minds when used correctly. It may surprise you to know that many of the concerns you may have surrounding video games may actually be misconceptions, like the potentially addictive nature of video games and the potential harm they may pose to a child's development. This is a fair concern. After all, some parents have reported this supposed addiction before, wherein all their child wants to do is play video games. As it turns out, video games aren't inherently addictive. In fact, the nature of the design doesn't make it so, but rather a habit that would require moderation, something akin to sugar or perhaps overeating, as according to psychologist Alexander Chris. He emphasized this with one of his patients who felt that they were addicted to games on their phone, when in reality, they simply use it as a way to fill in time when they had nothing else to do. This is part of the reason why I support a preventative measure like time limits to ensure that children are still allowed for adequate time for other activities within their lives. Parents and doctors often call for a more responsible portrayal of violence in the media because it's often glorified. We see this a lot in video games, after all. But as it stands, the ESRB rates games to address concerns about violent or explicit content within games, so parents are able to consider a game's rating before allowing their child to play it. Your concerns didn't go unnoticed. After all, that's why the ESRB was created. So my advice is to read the rating and understand whether you feel comfortable with your child playing the game that they want to play. Parents also worry about a lack of physical activity, but tend to overlook games like Wii Sports or even Just Dance, which actually promote physical activity and can provide a cost-effective option for families in low-income households, as supported by a study done by Stacy Guy. His team at the Lawson Health Research Institute saw it as a good way to combat childhood obesity. Your concerns are valid, but it may interest you to know that there are actual benefits associated with video games. A fact like this is promising for a balanced approach to integrating video games into children's lives in a way that helps parents rather than worries them. First, consider that video games can act as a cathartic release for aggression, reducing it rather than inciting it. Psychologists like Alexander Chris emphasize the role of displacement, where gaming offers an outlet for negative emotions and may actually help to better control it instead. In fact, Chris's findings were supported by Simone Kuhn, a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, who found similar findings in her studies. This means you can use video games as a way to relieve stress or unwanted feelings of aggression within your life. Next, consider that there are also cognitive benefits for memory, focus, and critical thinking skills. Story-driven games like Undertale provide insightful experiences, fostering moral decision-making and empathy. And strategy games like Total War emphasize strategic thinking and planning. There are even games that are based around the whole idea of puzzles, like Super Mario 64, and puzzles have already been proven to be effective for years. In fact, the University of Poitiers' Leigh Martinez points out in her study that she noticed, quote, a negative linear relation between the overall playtime and the non-switching and switching reaction times. The more the participants played, the higher their efficiency became, end quote. This overall proves the concept. There are even more social benefits for video games. This is especially evident in multiplayer platforms like Minecraft or Halo, and a multitude of others. In fact, it's often by these games that people have met real-life friends, or just friends in general, or just people with similar interests. You can certainly count learning to make friends as a benefit. As Dr. Jane McGonigal says, quote, community feels good. It feels like belonging, fitting in and actively caring about something together, end quote. There are even real-world uses for video games, like the use of simulators for pilot instruction. The Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, actually regulates the use of simulators as a way for pilots to earn hours towards their license. There are also alternate reality games, like Chore Wars, which can be used for task organization. There was even a study that was conducted in Canada that showed that games like Assassin's Creed are shown to be effective tools for teaching history, in comparison to a long, boring lecture, which, let's be honest, your child likely wouldn't pay attention to. Even just looking at the industry, which generates billions annually, it underscores the artistic and creative importance of video games. Video games represent far more than just strings of code. They represent art. Now that's cool to think about. With this new information, I believe that you as parents are now well equipped to make a well-meaning decision for your children. Consider some of the benefits I've talked about, like the basic benefits. And if you're a teacher, some of the educational and real-world benefits. Ultimately, this is a decision that you as a parent are now qualified to make. Thank you.